Welcome back to part 3 of What If Padme Was a Jedi. Thank you to those of you who watched either of the first 2 parts. To recap what happened in those episodes in the event you haven't seen them, Qui-Gon and the Sith had been in a battle for the abilities of Padme and Anakin. Maul had initially been successful by abducting the young Force sensitives to Dathomir, but following a betrayal by his master, the Jedi reclaimed Padme and Anakin to train for themselves, and Dooku began his service under Sidious. As Padme and Anakin grew closer, Yoda decides to test Anakin by returning to Dathomir, when his journey took an unexpected turn. Qui-Gon and Anakin turned around into the mist, hearing the voice of none other than Shmi Skywalker. This had not been a part of the trial planned by Qui-Gon and Yoda, and before he could stop Anakin, the Padawan had ran into the murky darkness, and the Jedi Master began to give chase, hearing the sound of lightsabers somewhere in the distance. Charging with his blade in hand, Qui-Gon saw Anakin battling with the real Maul, and he leapt to the defense of his Padawan. Maul had been rebuilt by Talzin after his crash landing on Dathomir, and now sought revenge against both the Jedi and the Sith. As the Jedi began their assault, Maul continued to back off into the confines of a network of caves, and that was when the Jedi heard the voice of Shmi tied to a wall. Maul had managed to lay a perfect trap for the Jedi, having received a transmission from one of his spies on Coruscant, and to kidnap Shmi from the Lars home. As Anakin ran to free Shmi, he precisely threw his lightsaber at the bindings, and he caught her before she dropped into a chasm. But as the Jedi rushed back to Qui-Gon and Maul, he saw his master tiring, and placing Shmi on the floor, Anakin tackled Maul to the ground, and the Jedi sent Maul into the swamp, as they then managed to escape to Coruscant. Upon his return to the temple, Anakin was knighted by the Jedi Council, and after Padme had also passed her trials, their first mission was to investigate how Maul had managed to find the location of Shmi. Joined by Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, the Jedi searched the underworld for Maul's influence, and find the Zabrak's name being spoken in hushed whispers by bounty hunters. Suddenly, the Jedi hear shots firing near them, and hiding behind several supply crates, they see a bounty hunter in Mandalorian armour, silencing those that are mentioned Maul. Taking a visual scan of the attacker back to the temple, Jedi Master Teros Sanube examines the bounty hunter to be Jango Fett, one of the most feared warriors in the galaxy. The Jedi are unaware of his whereabouts, and the next logical move was to head to Mandalore to find more about Jango Fett, taking one of their small Corellian freighters. The 4 Jedi approached the Outer Rim planet, which had been subject to a rebuild from the recent Civil War, and landing just outside of the royal palace, Duchess Satine dismisses her guards to allow the Jedi to walk to her throne. Prime Minister Almec is also present, and has the answers they required on Jango Fett, stating that he was not of Mandalorian origin, but merely was an owner of Mandalorian armour. The Jedi seemed to be at a dead end, when they all heard a large explosion in the city square. Igniting their blades, the smoke cleared to reveal that the Death Watch had made their return, and Vizsla proudly brandished his darksaber. Obi-Wan felt the rage boil within him at the thought of Satine being in danger, and challenging the warrior to a duel. Everyone else backed off to give them space. Using his jetpack to rise up into the air, Vizsla was met by Obi-Wan at the apex of his leap, and using the force to push him back into a statue, Vizsla retaliated with his flaming gauntlets. Obi-Wan calmly sidestepped the attack, and the duel grew in intensity and speed, until Obi-Wan used his superior skills to disarm the warrior, and caught his darksaber. Resisting the temptation to kill Vizsla, the Death Watch were rounded by the Jedi, and placed in the city's prison. Obi-Wan knew he could lure Jango Fett with a darksaber, and returning to Coruscant, Padme broadcast an attempt on her life from Vizsla, whilst Obi-Wan stood beside her with his darksaber, hoping he could draw out the bounty hunter. Returning to the underworld where they had previously seen him, Obi-Wan pretended to be drinking at the bar, when Jango sat beside him, and began to discuss a prize for the darksaber. Obi-Wan did not respond to the offer, and as the bounty hunter's patience began to wear thin, the other Jedi emerged from the shadows to capture him, and take him to one of the Jedi Temple's holding cells. Windu, Obi-Wan and Anakin interrogate Jango Fett, and after brief resistance, the Jedi managed to discover that he had been under the service of Count Dooku, and was being used to establish a clone template on Kamino, as well as tracking Padme and Anakin. The revelation that Dooku was working undercover for the Sith prompted a council meeting, and they worked out that neither Dooku nor Maul had been the master, meaning that there was someone else operating in the background. The question for the Jedi was who. That is it for part 3 of What If Padme Was a Jedi. If you'd like to see an ending soon, please like this video, turn on that notification bell, click that subscribe button on this channel, as well as on my other channel What If Films. And as always, leave a comment on what if you'd all like to see next, and how I can improve my videos. Thank you all very much for watching, and see you next time.